Sunday to spend it here with us. Grief, loss, and bereavement is a very emotive topic. And I don't know about you, but I find Sundays quite solemn. My dad used to play jazz music every day of the week. Saturdays, that was his day for jazz, but Sundays was classical music. And for some reason, it's the day that I miss him the most. It's the day my heart weeps the most. There's something about Sundays for me that makes grief quite sensitive, but then again, grief is incredibly complex. So why are we here? In the early days of the pandemic, we all saw the news about the stories, the statistics, got our tongue tied, and the speculation about the disproportionate numbers of Black, Asian, and minoritized ethnic people who were dying from COVID. And in our communities, we were hearing the stories of families not being able to grieve in the way that they want to, not being able to perform memorials and rituals in the way that we're accustomed to. And it really came home to me when Dame Jocelyn Barrow died in April. And for those who don't know, she was actually the first Black woman to be a governor of the BBC. And she was actually also the founder of the Broadcasting Standards Council. Well, apart from what seemed to be a silence around her death, that's a different topic for a different time. But people were texting and phoning to confirm whether or not she had actually passed. And one of the reasons was there was no notice out there about her funeral. And it was quite distressing. I mean, I attended her 90th birthday party, as I know some of the people in this conversation attended. So her passing was, one, a surprise, but two, the silence around it was a bit shocking. And the fact that we weren't allowed to attend a funeral and give her what she deserved as someone who was so fundamental in the issues around being Black, being female, in not only just the BBC, but in English society. We attended her online funeral. There were 5 people. Quite incredibly distressing. Then we lost a pioneer from the Notting Hill Carnival. And I don't know if you're familiar with funerals within the Notting Hill Carnival fraternity. They start at the Tabernacle and they weave their way through Notting Hill. We are all facing tough times, but for those who have lost a loved one, it's incredibly, incredibly difficult. So when we saw what was happening, we decided to come together, and BAME Stream was formed out of that. So I don't know if any of you, well, I know some of you did attend the launch on Thursday, but for those who don't, BAME Stream is really a collective, an alliance of Black, Asian, and minoritized practitioners, therapists, policy experts, activists, and academics. And we've all come together to work in the area of mental health, and that includes grief, loss, and bereavement. It's led by Patrick Vernon, Helen George, who sends her apologies, and myself. Grief, loss, and bereavement I'll say again, it is very emotive, but there's no one size fits all way of dealing with it. So we're here today, and I know we're gonna hear so many stories and exchanges about the different cultural variations where that's concerned. So to kick off the discussion, we have 3 members from BAATN. We've got Dr. Aisha, we've got Eugene, and we've got Dennis. Please, welcome, welcome. Please can I ask you 3 to unmute yourselves and start our conversation. Tell us about intercultural and intergenerational grief.
Thank you very much. Hello, we're really honoured to join you here this evening for this event. My name is Eugene Ellis. I'm the director and founder of the Black, African and Asian Therapy Network, or BAATN. So BAATN's a service that hopes to address the inequality of access to appropriate psychological services for Black, African, South Asian and Caribbean heritage people. Focus is on supporting therapists into their training and mentoring them, and to try to influence the mainstream therapy profession through literature and training and practice. We also have an online directory of almost 500 therapists from those communities. I'm here with Dennis Carney and Aisha Mackenzie Mavinga, two of our leadership members. And Aisha will be saying a little bit about intersectional context of grief and loss. Dennis will be saying a little bit about HIV, COVID-19, grief, and me. And he will have a personal story and a personal journey there. And I'll also be reflecting on a personal journey. And the thing that I'm going to be talking about is the cry of the ancestors. So the three of us will remain on screen, and we're going to see if it can be interactive between us. So to support each other in some ways, and also hopefully to make it a little more interactive for those watching. At the end of our reflections, we want to open up to your reflections and thoughts from those who are watching, and we'll let you know when to put something in the chat, and then we'll kind of read what you say, and we'll reflect on your reflections of our reflections, and of course your own reflections. So I'm a psychotherapist and soon to be author. I've got a book coming out called The Race Conversation soon. But I wanted to get Dennis and Aisha just to say a little bit about themselves before we kind of start the presentation. So maybe Aisha, do you want to just say a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm a psychotherapist. Hello, Alex. Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist and counsellor and a lecturer and also a writer. And I published 2 books emanating from my doctoral thesis. And those books came out of a study of the impact of racism on the psychology of Black peoples. And this is the main theme of my work these days, just really thinking about how to engage with the mind of Black peoples and Asian peoples who have been impacted by racism, and how that affects their relationships and their psychological processes. That's all I'll say for now.
Okay. And Dennis, just want to say a bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi, I'm Dennis. I've been a member of the BAATN leadership team for about 10 years. I did my training in humanistic psychotherapy for 12 years at an organization called Spectrum. Some people might know me as a Black LGBT activist. I don't really like that label, but some people put that onto me. And I primarily work with groups. I teach at the City Lit in Covent Garden. I've been working there for about 15 years. And I worked for a mental health charity, an LGBT mental health charity, for about 15 years called PACE. Yeah, and I haven't written a book.
I'm sure it's not going to be too long before you do, Dennis. Okay, so maybe we'll start off with Aisha, and then Dennis will start and will say something, and then I will. But so Aisha going to be talking about the intersectional context of grief and loss.
Oh, first of all, I'd like to say thanks to the organisers for inviting us to contribute to this webinar, really important webinar. And also to say that after agreeing to take part in this event, I felt reluctant because it can be difficult to have this important dialogue about our grief without opening up a can of worms. And I'm very aware that my colleagues, Eugene and Dennis, were feeling similar. In a short space of time, there's not much room for emotions, but we're going to present what we can. We've suffered personal and collective grief, and as therapists, we've had to put our own grief aside while supporting others who are grieving. First, I want to offer my condolences to those who've lost loved ones through illness, through tragedy, and because of COVID-19 virus. At this time, I also want to remember and offer condolences to the families of those lives lost in the mental health system, because this is a really important area of the work we do. Those lost who's lost their lives in the penal system, and those families who've suffered tragic loss due to police violence and slaughter, of our loved ones. And also my condolences to those connected to key members of our therapeutic community as Black and Asian people. And this year we lost two really important Black men, Lennox Thomas and Enrique Grant, who contributed greatly to transcultural and Black psychotherapy and counselling. A mixture of sadness and loss, whilst at the same time celebration of another life, is important and gives us a sense of who we are as humans. This is what gives us a sense of connection. In our work as African, Caribbean and Asian therapists, we also bear witness to several layers of evidence in our grieving processes. Our mental health can suffer from these layers of grief and loss, and the challenges of saying goodbye to loved ones in a community that suffers the consequences of social distance, emotional distance, geographical distance, often compounded by intergenerational and intercultural costs and oppressions that can set us apart. It's a huge challenge not to be in each other's arms when we're grieving. And I want to briefly outline factors that can interfere and compound our connections when we've lost loved ones. On a personal level, my own children were challenged by the passing of their father, who lived in Jamaica. The restrictions of closed national boundaries and diverse customs created multiple layers of grieving and loss, but not being able to say a final, unrestricted goodbye within their Caribbean family seemed to compound their grief. In addition, a live memorial to mark his departure had been arranged in the UK, and then lockdown happened. So we've been going through this for months. The impact on family traditions and customs is huge due to the pandemic, and this goes deeper than just numbers attending services and burials. Gathering of community and the village at African, Caribbean and Asian burials and memorials is generally a norm in our places of origin and for our descendants in the UK. The tradition of 9 nights and a wake that incorporates food, blessings, music, and fond memories meaningful to a final goodbye have been quashed or relegated to a screen. Graveside rituals such as honouring ancestors, drumming, placing palm leaves, singing and wailing have been quashed due to attendance restrictions on the COVID battlefield. Being allowed to attend a funeral but not allowed to sing shuts down the grieving process of self-expression, and this is only workable for individuals who are assimilated and have become used to silent tears. And I've also heard that racism exists in funeral parlours where, I see some heads nodding here, where Black ministers are not being given work. I won't extend that at the moment, but I heard this from a very close friend who's an interfaith minister. We are also aware of the intersectional impact of oppressions, in particular racism. It's very difficult to talk about racism in a group like this without talking about racism, and that's our work. That's our work as therapists at BAATN. The enduring impact of racism that many people of colour experience can also play a role in rifts within family groups and in the self-esteem of individuals. The emotional context of learning not to cry out loud has inhibited many due to don't discharge messages and also social stereotypes that cause internalization of real feelings. And this is in addition to being in a chapel and being told that you can't sing, therefore you can't wail, you can't scream. In addition, these feelings are compounded by a sense of multi-layered silencing, adding to heartbreak, as mourners are able to attend a funeral but not express themselves loudly inside the chapel. This can curb the colourful dress and camaraderie that have been cultural ways of identifying within our communities. The impact of racism on our health can make breathing seem like a luxury sometimes. The full-blown impact of racism and other forms of violence echoes heavily in our hearts, our minds, bodies, and our actions. Needless to say, the problems with our health that we suffer as a result of trying to survive in this community. Cultural conflicts about ways of grieving can impact on identity and self-worth and bury feelings of anger and guilt. And we've heard repeatedly about these feelings in our therapeutic sessions with individuals who've experienced loss. The grandmother of deceased Colton Bushy told the New York Times, "Even to this day, I hold back on crying. I pray the way I was taught in the residential school. Our Father, Hail Mary, and all that," she said. And then in other ways, I believe what my granny believes. Both ways. And sometimes I think about it. Which one is true? The Catholic way or my granny? So I just go on both sides. So you can see how this plays with the mind. Miss Denny was sent to 2 schools run by the Roman Catholic Church. She said that when she was beaten with a leather strap by the school's nuns and priests, she made a vow. I wasn't going to give them what they wanted to hear. Me crying. I just held it back. And even to this day, I'm like that. I hold back on crying. It kind of hurts me, you know. And so this familiar, what I call don't discharge messages often occur in the work that we do. And so there's the inner stopping of the expression of grief, but there's also the impact of racism and the stereotypes that often we fear as a result of fully expressing ourselves and our grief. This is a familiar mode of containing oneself amidst the pain of oppression and past hurts, reinforced by belief systems, family traditions, and in opposition to customs of loud expression and loss and grief. After each loss, our identities and self-understanding become transformed, and generally we get an opportunity to rethink our lives and reassess our responses to oppression and consider the joy of connection and reunion and ways of moving our lives on. But for the present, we are limited in our ways of grieving and bound to be creative with what we have, and we still have each other. So that's all I'm going to say for now. And
yeah, nice. So much there, Aisha. So much there.
Yeah, there's a lot packed into a small.
A lot packed in there, yeah.
Mm.
And just I'm just feeling really sad hearing all of that all together. And just reflecting on the work that we do and in BAATN and how certainly I feel it in my body a lot, and I'm feeling it now, that sort of weighing down, that holding in, that non-expression, trying to counteract it in some way. Yeah, thank you, Aisha.
Yeah, it's just so multi-layered.
Yeah. But when we come together in community, we can, even if it's in this small way, we can move some way.
Yeah.
So I think Dennis now is going to give us a personal story. HIV, COVID, grief, and me.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Yeah, so many thanks for sharing your openness, honesty, and wisdom with us, Aisha. I really, really appreciate what you shared. So my name is Dennis, and I've been a member of the BAATN BAATN leadership team for the last 10 years or so. And like Aisha said and mentioned, in preparation for this conversation, I noticed I had some reluctance to talk about my grief and my personal journey. And I guess, you know, I imagine for a wide variety of reasons, I'm not alone here, especially if your parents told you never to put your business abroad. You know, so the idea of coming here and sharing openly about some of my experiences really did set some reluctance in me. But I'm here, and I'm here to share. Firstly, I think the first thing I want to say is I wouldn't describe myself as an expert on bereavement, far from it. Yes, I've done some training around this and I've worked with clients around loss and bereavement, but I certainly wouldn't describe myself as an expert. During this conversation, I aim to share some of my own personal experiences. As a Black gay man, I've had a lot of personal experience of death and bereavement, especially during the early days of the HIV epidemic. And I think that's also true of the COVID pandemic. I think as a Black person, I definitely have experienced loss and bereavement in, I think, much higher levels than, let's say, the general population here. During my mid-20s, I worked for an HIV charity that provided accommodation for people living with HIV and AIDS. And I worked there for 10 years. And for the whole 10 years that I was there, nobody ever asked me, oh, Dennis, do you think it would be helpful to have some bereavement counselling? In fact, we were expected as staff just to get on with it. We had tenants dying on a weekly basis, yet there was nowhere for us to talk about that. And like I say, we were just expected to get on with it. At the same time as working for that organisation, I was dealing with the traumatic loss of many gay friends who died from HIV. My first boyfriend died from AIDS. I had a subsequent boyfriend who was diagnosed with HIV. I was at the bedside of a very close friend when he died. And yeah, you know, the impact of that has been quite heavy on me when I think about it. And at the time, there were very, very few places to talk about it because of the level of stigma, discrimination, hatred, fear that surrounded AIDS. I can remember going to funerals where people wouldn't even mention the cause of death. In fact, they'd often say that the person died of cancer and not AIDS. I would remember people not acknowledging the sexuality of the person who died because of shame and stigma around homosexuality in our communities. And the kind of pain, certainly the pain that caused me in terms of, the kind of the invisibility, I guess, of their lives and their contributions while they were here. I think when I think about HIV and I think about the pandemic and I think about now, one of the things that struck me is how much little has changed in terms of provision of support and help and guidance around grief and bereavement. And when I think about the fact that, who would I go and talk to if I can't talk to my family members around death and loss? Who's going to actually listen? I think often people feel really uncomfortable talking about death, loss, and that's obvious. I think it's a very taboo subject, not just in our communities, but I think worldwide. And when I think about today, and when I think about COVID, again, as a black man, I think I've lost quite a significant number of people in my life due to COVID. I'm currently dealing with the loss of a family member who died 2 weeks ago, suddenly. I'm also dealing with the death of a very treasured and valued member of the leadership team, Arike. So yeah, over the last 9 months, I've been dealing with a lot of grief. And I think one of the things that I think Aisha mentioned was the fact that most people are not able to attend funerals and interact and deal with grief in the way that we would normally do. And when I think about the number of funerals that have happened over the last 9 months, I've only been able to attend one funeral. And that funeral was via the computer. Now, if I'm being really honest, I think the idea of attending the funeral online was a bit of a relief, because I think I've attended so many funerals over the years. In fact, I remember thinking, oh, am I going to go to this funeral? And then I thought, do I really want to go? And then I thought, actually, the fact that it's online enables me to be there in a way that I couldn't be there. And I have to say, having that screen there was really helpful. You know, what Aisha was saying about hiding our pain, hiding our tears, hiding behind that screen enabled me to do that in a way that I don't think I would have been able to do if I was in a room full of people. So whilst I know Zoom gets a lot of bad press, I think for me on that occasion, I found it a really helpful way to grieve, and grieve in a way that was meaningful to me. So I just wanted to throw that in, because I think that's a perspective that's often not acknowledged. I think one of the things that I noticed, especially around HIV, was that there was a huge amount of silence. Nobody talked about it. And I think the other thing that I realized that's very similar to today is that, you know, Black and brown people were expected to be resilient around it. You know, we were just expected to get on with it. And I think the same is true when I think about COVID. You know, I think the same is true again. I think, you know, dealing with grief during lockdown has been particularly challenging and difficult. As I think Aisha mentioned, the inability to hug and touch in a way that is very, very important for me in terms of my grieving process. The absence of that has been really, really challenging for me on a personal level. Not being able to be with family right now is also really, really hard. My sister's just gone through the loss of her partner, and I can't be there for her. I can't hug her, I can't hold her in the way that I know I want to. I can't attend the funeral because there are restrictions on the numbers of people who are there. The funeral is going to be next Thursday. I want to be there with my sister. I can't be there for my sister. That pains me. And you know, I was actually anxious about even mentioning that today, because I thought, well, do people really want to sit here and listen to me bawl in tears and wail? Is this what this space is about? And I really want to thank the fact that there are all these Black and brown faces watching me and listening to me share, because I think these spaces are so rare in my experience. And so I just want to thank BMA Stream for putting this on and making a space available where Black and brown people can talk about these things, because I think it's important to talk. But one thing that I'm left with when I think about all of this, I'm reminded of a famous quote by Maya Angelou. And I remember her saying that this too shall pass. And I think it's true, the difficult times that we're going through right now in our communities will pass, and better days are ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.
You hear that saying so often in the Caribbean, this too shall pass. It's comforting, but it doesn't help immediately. And I also feel it's a really useful saying, a cultural saying that gets bandied about. Thank you for also considering an alternative perspective to being forced to use the screen for grieving, you know, because often we don't think about what can be the benefits, if anything, you know, and sharing your perspective on that is quite important. Also, that you're a Black gay man talking about your experience, and I want to thank you for that too. And while you were talking, I was thinking about how often, and I hear this mainly in the Caribbean, young Black men in particular will commit suicide rather than come out to their families. And that's not spoken about much.
Not at all.
Sad and heartbreaking situation of a loss and a grief that is also silenced because of homophobia.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we do speak these things, and particularly about HIV. You know, I have a gay friend who I've known for years, but it was still years before he told me he was HIV positive. And so what?
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's really important for us to name these things and be able to talk about them and to grieve over the specific areas of oppression and connection that we lose because we don't talk about these things. Yeah.
And thank you, Aisha. And you know, even a friend of mine came out to me recently, and he was diagnosed over 20 years ago, and he knows that I have worked in the field for decades, and still felt reluctant to disclose that information to me.
Yeah.
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 Thank you, Dennis. Your voice is very important to BAATN and to me. Okay, I'm going to do my bit. I'm just going to sort of dedicate this to Arike, who we lost, and I'm still feeling the loss of him. So I'll be sort of doing a personal story. So I'm going to be looking at grief and loss of my father through the lens of intergenerational trauma. And this wasn't a recent loss. It wasn't due to COVID. But I wanted to reflect on grieving when the person that you're grieving is the person that's also hurt you, either physically or emotionally or both. And different people have different ways of grieving in situations like this. And I suspect that there may be a few people in the audience who've been faced with this themselves. You know, yeah, so how do you grieve? How do you grieve that? So this is just my one story, really. So I want to say a little bit about trauma itself, and then I want to tell you about my father, and then read a piece of creative writing that I've entitled "The Cry of the Ancestors," that expresses where I am now with his loss as a father and the relationship that we had. Like for many of us, trauma shaped our lives and our inner lives, just as Aisha was saying, the holding back of grief, of anger. Intergenerational trauma was the context in which our relationship had been shaped, and that intergenerational trauma had been passed on to me. My father died a while ago in August 2004 from pneumonia after suffering a stroke. And he was living in Jamaica at the time with my mother. So as a family, the 7 of us, we went over to attend the funeral. We couldn't at that time. And as we were there were many stories of his skill as a craftsman, his generosity towards the local community and where he lived. And he was very generous. He could do no wrong. But where there are stories of outside the home, there's also the silent stories of inside the home. Whilst in the UK, he was clearly a different person now. He'd been there went back to Jamaica and had been there for about 15 years or so. But the silence of the past kind of still created a sort of disconnection, and I couldn't really grieve. As well as expelling frustration while he was in the UK, my father's used to beat us, as we all got beaten. That was what happened. But these beatings were, in my mind, a sort of generational old strategy to ensure that I repressed any notions of rebellion, and that kept me out of harm's way. And he perceived the real danger as being outside of the home, and he wanted to keep me out of harm's way. But my father's beatings had shaped my experience of fear. So fear was seeped into my body and sort of impacted almost every aspect of my life. Being in therapy with a black man was where, for the first time, I'd really looked at my relationship with him in any meaningful way. And I think being with a black man kind of just allowed something to happen which couldn't happen with another person. So along with the therapy, I've done a process of writing, and I've been doing lots of writing for many years. This allowed me to talk about him in a way that did not rob us of the history and context of what shaped us. I can speak about him now, but I don't think I can speak about him without reference to our history and our ancestors. And I felt it would not be impossible to communicate the hurt of our relationship and also bring compassion, forgiveness, and understanding to the moment of ancestral time that my father and I found ourselves in when I was a child. I wrote this piece while I was on a retreat, and reflecting both on the ancestors I knew in my past and the ancestors that I didn't know. And as I was reflecting, I just put together these words, and it came together really, really quickly. Normally I have to spend a lot of time on these things, but it literally, I just sat down under a tree and it just came out. So this is called The Cry of the Ancestors. So I'll read it out. Black, naked, bound and broken, a crushed heart inside a broken soul. Sons and daughters bear witness. This was once a man. Black, naked, fearful and fertile. White faces bright with eyes of lust for a mixing of the blood. Sons and daughters bear witness. This was once a woman. Hardy limbs, black and plentiful, claim unspeakable horrors, more beast than human. Sons and daughters bear witness. This was once a people. Daddy, this is our legacy. But what of us playing our part in this dance from the past, with no balm to soothe the corners of the mind which lock away that loveless dread, that which is our inheritance? With your muscle and sinew giving up a little of the mind's secret as they smash and grind and silently scream, with only my small child's cry of fear and bewildered confusion as a mirror into a time one should have long forgot. But it's enough. It's enough to ensure that this corner of the world's suffering does not go unnoticed. For many years of unlocking the unsayable, I want you to know that I've heard you. I've heard your plea. I know that you have journeyed through this system they call race, that chisels away at your bigness and brings with it large and small humiliations that stir the depths of shame, with sons and daughters bearing witness to what was once a man. I heard the cry of the ancestors through your fists and gritted teeth. Fight and perish, cower and survive. Daddy, I hear your plea. There is no place for vulnerability in this world for you or for me. How I wish we could have looked at each other with kindly eyes, that we could have shared a moment without fear, that we could have been vulnerable together, like I know now it's possible to be. Daddy, you followed the ancestral call, and for that, I am grateful. Willingly, I step forward with my personal sacrifice in hand to bring words to the wordless and feeling to the hurt. I'd want to stop there.
That's very moving, Eugene. And, you know, in addressing the shame and fear perpetrated ancestrally, you can feel the healing that's going on because of your ability to do that, which I'm sure you've done a lot of work on that area to come to this place where you can name it and feel the compassion from within yourself and forgiveness that's needed really for you to grow and heal through this situation. May the ancestors be honored in this process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eugene. I think what you really touched on there for me was just the anger of that I think a lot of Black men experience due to the situations that they find themselves in, and then how that's transferred, you know, intergenerationally is very powerful. And well done for being a man who is able to be vulnerable despite that history.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Aisha. It's strange saying the poem here, but also I feel fine with it. Actually, my body would have crumbled years ago. My body would have just crumbled. That would have been it. But so it feels fine to say, and it just feels really honest to give both sides of my experience with him. Yeah.
There's quite a few messages coming through in the chat and the Q&A that maybe we can attend to.
Yeah.
And lots of moving responses to your presentation in particular, Eugene.
Yeah.
Powerful stories by Dennis and Eugene, very helpful. Voices of self and others listening and speaking internally. Thank you for sharing your pain and healing, Eugene. It was moving, twisted and beautiful all at once. So we could perhaps look at the Q&A, I think, and see what people want to know in there.
There is a separate button here
Yes.
for questions. So this one here, how as therapists can we work with that impact of non-expression of grief to allow our clients some healing? And not just therapists, I guess, just with our families and our friends too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How can we work on the impact of non-expression of grief? Yeah.
You want to answer that, Eugene?
I
can say something. I'm offering you the chance.
Yeah. I suppose to give people time. I suppose that my own experience is of that. What can I say? I mean, there's something about attending to the body, I think, and just finding the way to be embodied somehow, finding the way to be in the body. So like sometimes we can get into our heads and try to sort of justify or try to work it through or try to say things to ourselves. And sometimes just locating where the feelings are in the body can just allow something to be released. But of course, then you'll need people around you who can hold that grief and are accepting of it and take it in. So finding the right people is important as well. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of dealing with the grief that's going on in my family right now, I think one of the messages that has come across quite strongly from all corners of the family really is not to be silent about this and to keep on talking to each other about the impact of this loss, especially during this time. And just acknowledging that it's not something that we are expecting ourselves to get over in 2 weeks, as the kind of culture in this country is expected you to do. And that we can express our grief, that it's okay for us to express our grief in any way that we think is right. And not to kind of go around with this British stiff upper lip as if nothing's happened. I think it's been very important to us as a family to keep on the conversation and to hold his memory. Yeah.
And also, what might appear to be a non-expression of grief is an expression of grief. And so it's important not to, speculate that this person is not grieving because they're shut down in some way. We know that historically, many of us have been shut down because of our histories, because of colonization, slavery, etc. And as therapists, this question came from a therapist. As therapists, it's really important that we do our own healing in that area, that we make a decision to work on our own shutdownness around grieving, and all of us have it in different variations. And also that because we have knowledge and wisdom, and we know what's happened to our communities intergenerationally and interculturally, including the assimilation processes of being in Europe, because we know that, as Dennis said, we are holding that somehow, and we can experience naturally and intuitively what we know our bodies are saying to us, as Eugene suggested. We can just find a way to overcome any fears of feeling this is something that we can't do as therapists, so that we can, in a way, model for the clients that we're working with. And I always say to supervisees that we are holding that element that's not being spoken until the client is ready to reveal how they feel about, how they really feel about not being able to express for a start, on top of what it is that they're actually not expressing. So there's 2 layers there, multiple layers in fact, cultural layers, intergenerational layers, and so on.
Yeah. Of course, there's rage as well, somewhere possibly there too. That's also in the mix. It's not normally just one feeling, and it's often a suppression of all types of feeling, and rather than just one in particular. Okay, I've got another. I've got another question here. Many of us are dealing with issues of personal grief. How do we heal from the grief that we all experienced so publicly with the death of George Floyd, so brutally exposed? So sort of connections that we feel to him and to others who've been brutalized by police. How do we work with, how do we heal from that?
Again, I feel that it's not healthy for us to shut down on it. Mind you, there are times when I felt like withdrawing from the battle because that public lynching of George Floyd opened up a mine, what would I say, a mine of explosion around the racism that many of us have experienced. And it's collective, even though sometimes we may feel alone in our grief. From that day on, I remember crying every day for at least a month, crying at many things, but but also just noticing that crying is healthy. And crying is healthy. Crying is a way of healing. So I think sharing our collective grief and also not being alone in it too much is quite important, because from our own homes, we saw it, even though it happened thousands of miles away. And it opened, as I said, a mine. And then it was Black Lives Matter. And so what's come out of that is that we're having this. We're having these meetings, we're addressing these issues, we're sharing some of the grief and the experiences of healing. And no matter how difficult and painful it is, that's also part of the healing. Once we start to share it, that's part of the healing.
Yeah, I agree with you, and you remind me, Aisha, that one of my dearest friends, who I've been friends with for what must be 25 years, 30 years, for the first time, the two of us broke down in tears and were incredibly vulnerable with each other in a way that we've never been before. I mean, unlike a lot of people, I'd refused to watch the lynching, as you quite rightly put it, Aisha, of George Floyd. Yeah, because I think it just adds to, you know, the trauma that I've already experienced in terms of witnessing Black death on our TV screens and mobile screens, and I've decided not to subject myself to that anymore. And that doesn't mean that it didn't have a huge impact on me, especially in terms of feelings of rage and anger. And I think one of the things that I think the HIV epidemic kind of hid for me or highlighted for me was just the level of anger that I felt, but I misdirected that anger. I thought it was about homophobia and racism, and not actually recognizing that I wasn't dealing with the anger in relationship to the high level of grief that I experienced. And it wasn't until I went into therapy that I discovered that. So yeah, it's no surprise to me that there are demonstrations around the world today, because it's just part of that grieving process, I think, anger, that isn't often acknowledged or talked about.
Yeah, and I think the way that I have, I mean, I had a period of being numb for weeks and weeks and weeks, shutting down. I guess that's just my style, the initial thing that happens to me, and I have to work to kind of come out of that, be connected. And it's really, really been through the through the gatherings that we've had. We've met up with people, connected with people. I think the tendency is for me to just not engage and just sort of see if I can do it on my own and hide away, and hopefully it will go away. And it's difficult being in the spaces where people were angry, grieving, but that's where I needed to be, and that's actually healed me to a degree. And that's really important for me to connect with people, and just keep connecting, keep connecting, keep connecting. And a lot of people were strangers I was connecting with. It didn't really matter. We're all black. We're all in the same. We all feel it. We all feel that connection. And then somehow through our bodies, we transmit something to each other. And it sort of, I could just feel myself coming back to myself.
Yeah, I just want to add that the ways in which we grieve are personal and collective, and also intergenerational and intercultural. And the ways in which we cope with grief are the same. They're based on how we've learned to cope with loss and other situations from our past, from our origins. And this is, even though it feels abnormal and excruciating sometimes, these are normal responses to an abnormal situation, and the levels and the capacity of grief and loss that we've experienced just over the COVID period is just humongous. And one thing I want to say is that it's really important not to beat ourselves up because we're feeling that level of pain. And this too shall pass, as Eugene reminded us, but sometimes it takes longer than we think it will, and we don't know how long it will take. But the important thing is to not to do it alone, because often there's a pull to isolate, and the shame around expressing our pain makes us isolate. That's the wrong way to go. It's really important to share, find someone to share with, a friend, someone you trust, get a therapist if you can't find someone close who you feel you can trust with those raw emotions. And trust me, you will find someone if you seek hard enough. Sometimes hopelessness sets in and, oh, there's no one that wants to listen to me, and we feel bad. But there will always be someone there, somewhere. Traditionally, that's how our families and descendants have worked. Someone in the village will be there for us. Yeah.
Thank you, Aisha. That's a really good way to end. I think our time is up. And thank you for the questions. And it's been a pleasure to present some of this stuff to you. I'm going to hand you over to Yansie now, I think.
Thank you very much, Eugene. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Dennis. That's what I feel. That's what I feel. When Aisha started her introduction, she said a tribute to two people, one of which was Lennox Thomas. Lennox was my friend. Lennox was my mentor. Lennox was the person who guided my career, supported me through my research. Lennox was that Black man granddad to my children. I miss him. I miss him. When I heard Lennox died, I was on the floor for 5 days. I grieved for Lennox more than I grieved for my own dad. When my dad passed, Lennox was the person who, he always said to me, whatever you're going through, Yansie, you'll get through this, write about it. When my dad died, he said, just write. And I remember when he died, I thought, you know what? What's he going to say? Just write. So I wrote and wrote and wrote. Yeah, I was going to read something I wrote for him, but I can't. I miss Lennox. That's all I will say. Thank you so much for everyone, all the contributions. We've been through so many topics. There, we spoke about personal grief. You spoke about distance, customs, rituals, sexuality, physical health. That's not just COVID, racism, intergenerational trauma, which is something that touches so many of us, but it's almost like the elephant in the room. We don't really address it, and therefore the difficulties around healing from it. That issue of parental relationships and smacking, abuse, we've been there and we've normalized it, but we carry the burden of it. And when that parent dies, it's the grief that we deal with the anger that went with the, as Dr. Aisha said, the lynching of George Floyd and the racism that we've experienced. So many topics were covered there. Thank you so much. Thank you. As emotional as it is, these conversations are needed in our community. We need to find spaces to have more of these conversations because they're so incredibly helpful. So there you go. I'm back in the room. Patrick Vernon, at the beginning of the COVID situation and all the deaths and the setting up of mainstream, he decided that he wanted to do something that was incredibly phenomenal. Patrick, we all rate you for doing it, and that is to set up the Majonzi Fund. Patrick and Cashain, do you mind unmuting yourselves and talking us through the Majonzi Fund?
I've got, I think Tracy's got some slides, but before I start, I just want to acknowledge the BAATN leadership team, Eugene, Aisha, and my brother from another mother, Dennis. I just want to acknowledge your powerful, really powerful, heartfelt stories, the reality of grief that we have to deal with, not just linked to a particular person's past, but ongoing grief that we have to deal with. And particularly Eugene, I can identify what you said about the whole stuff around fathers, that trauma that is passed on to us, how we have to deal with it. It's something that a lot of Black men still have to deal with even today. So I just want to acknowledge that in particular. So before I go talk about Majonzi Fund, and I have my guest, Cashain's going to join and talk about how he's going to be, how he's involved in Majonzi Fund and what's grief to him. As you know, this is National Grief Week. I'm actually wearing a t-shirt, if you can see, National Grief Week. There's been a whole range of events starting from Thursday. As Yansie said, we launched mainstream, and that's going to be launched, developing a range of support services in the community for those who have suffered loss connected with COVID-19. But the Good Grief Trust, which we are partnering with, have been organised a whole range of events and activities. And so we thought it was important to use this opportunity to share experiences from, not just from the African and Caribbean community, but also from the Southeast Asian and other communities who have also experienced loss connected with COVID. But before we go straight into that, on a personal level, grief has been really big on me over the last several months. I've lost so many people I've known. So the first person I lost was actually this time last year, and Barbara Campbell, who I worked with for many years. She did Black History magazine. She died at the age of 61. She died of dementia, believe it or not, of dementia at 61. So she died in December of last year. And then another close friend of mine in Hackney, where I live, Andrea and Son, she was an activist, community organizer. She died around just before the lockdown, around about late February. And then Brother Dougie, you probably might dub, who was an activist, community historian, he also died around about March time. But the biggest death that's had an impact on me is the loss of my brother-in-law, Alex. He died in April of this year, sort of linked with COVID, but other issues as well. And then in July of this year, as you know, I've been heavily involved in the Windrush scandal. And a very close person I met along that journey, which I became part of her family, was Paulette Wilson. She died in July of this year. And really, the whole stuff around grief and the impact of grief that we all have to carry is immense. And, you know, seriously, it's just been like a whirlwind of dealing with all these deaths of people I knew personally, as well as other people I knew in the community. But anyway, let's move on to what we're going to focus on today, Majonzi Fund. Tracy, if you can do the honours, please. Thank you. So National Grief Week, and this is our contribution to that. And we're going to be looking at the Majonzi Fund. So the impact, just next slide, please, Tracy. Thank you. So as we all know, I'm not going to rehearse this. We know what the impact of COVID-19 has been on Black and Muslim communities. We know there's over 60,000 plus deaths have taken place in the last several months. And we roughly know that maybe 1 in 3 or maybe 1 in 4 people from the Black and Asian minority communities have died of COVID-19. And we also know that it required a number of us, from senior clinicians in NHS to campaigns activists and the public, to put pressure on the government to acknowledge this significant disproportionality of deaths in the community. And that is still ongoing, as we know, as the vaccine's been rolled out as from this week. And next slide, please, Tracy. And in response to that, in the absence of what was happening, and in terms of how I lost my brother-in-law to COVID this year, all families from different communities, different faith groups were struggling, as you heard already just a while ago, how to say goodbye to your loved one. How do you deal with grief? And that's why we established the Majonzi Fund, working closely with Ubele. And I want to personally acknowledge Yvonne Field, who we worked together on the idea of launching this. She can't join us today, but I want to acknowledge Yvonne in particular, founder of Ubele, a fantastic individual and campaigner for the community. So we launched the fund on GoFundMe April this year. And the main focus of the fund is about remembering of those who are lost to COVID-19. As you remember, during the time of the media coverage that took place during March, April, May, when we saw every day Black and Asian staff, and also a lot of Filipino staff in particular, dropping like flies, dying, linked to COVID-19, working in NHS, working in retail, working in the public transportation systems, not being acknowledged properly, basically. And I thought it was important that we do something like this. And that's why we launched the Majonzi Fund. Majonzi is a Swahili word, meaning grief and deep sorrow. And that's what we're all feeling, grief and deep sorrow. And so we felt it was important to do something around this. Next slide, please. So this is the main objectives of the Majonzi Fund. Firstly, that we recognise there is no national offer in terms of providing bereavement support for Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities in Britain. There's no national offer. Obviously, there are organisations that do this stuff, but there was no national offer. And that was further reflected in the research work that we did. And that led to the creation of BAME, including the BAATN, NASFIAT, the British Psychological Association, a number of campaigners, activists, Beaming Voices, and all working closely with the Ubele. We created BAME as trying to develop a national offer or intervention around more counselling support. We also recognised that a lot of us were losing our people due to COVID-19, and also there was no opportunity to say goodbye properly. And the idea was to launch a grant scheme so we could give out grants, and we hope to do this from next year onwards, so people could organise their own events or commission work or anything at all to recognise the loss of their loved ones from Black and Asian communities. And also we wanted to raise a profile around lobbying to acknowledge that about our loss, because often when the media focus on stuff, I mean, some media have done some good jobs in terms of focusing down on frontline staff, particularly Black and Asian staff who lost loved ones. But if you read the average media story, it's almost like our loss is insignificant, despite the fact we are overrepresented in the number of deaths linked with COVID-19. So we've been working closely with a range of organisations such as CRUISE, the Child Bereavement Network, National Bereavement Alliance, the Good Grief Festival, the Good Grief Trust, and also we're members of the GLA Bereavement Network. And also we work in partnership and support the work of the COVID-19 bereavement Families for Justice, who are demanding a public inquiry. And also this is some of the work that Ubele has been doing in terms of the Ubele We Need Answers campaign to recognise that our loss has to be acknowledged properly by the government. It can't be swept under the carpet because we are people of colour or because we don't value or recognise us. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned we've launched it. So NASFIA, one of our members, as part of BAME, they are now offering the service, a support service for those experiencing loss connected with COVID-19, either in terms of bereavement or just the impacts of social isolation or the impact of the lockdown as well. Next slide. And if you want to contact, you can go through the BAATN website, and where you can actually register for referral, and they will deal with and support you as well. As also, there's general information on the BAATN website as well. So I do urge you, if you know anyone that needs that support as well. Next slide. And so we're launching a grant scheme in early spring, and that will be, all information will be on the Majonzi website and the Ubele website. And the idea that we're going to be giving small grants to individuals, to community groups, to faith groups who want to organise events connected with people who have died of COVID-19, to recognise their achievement, commemoration of their loss. And as we explore later on as part of this programme, there'll be lots of conversations about how people have had to manage this as well. But this is our contribution. And for the Majonzi Fund, which we launched a GoFundMe in April, we've raised about just under £85,000. Our target is to raise £100,000. So if you've got deep pockets this evening, please go onto GoFundMe or contact us directly if you want to make a contribution of any sort as well. All money will be appreciated unashamedly, and they'll be grateful. But we'll be launching a scheme in the new year so people can apply as well. And we'll try and make the process as easy as possible to support those who need it to do things that they need to do. And we'll have the information on the website in terms of how you can, different examples as well. Next slide. So, and also we're going to be launching a schools competition next year as well, because we recognise that the impact of COVID-19 has also had the impact on young people, not just simply them losing loved ones, like maybe their parents, family members, or even siblings, but also it's had an impact on them in terms of how they see Britain, and particularly on how they see the future of Britain. And if you couple that with Black Lives Matter, then it's like, what kind of Britain do we want to have? I'm not being too political, but also with Brexit as well. What sort of Britain do we want to have for young people? So this is an opportunity for them to express and articulate that. So there'll be further details of that next year. Next slide. So a lot of people have been fantastic in raising money for Majonzi. Some people have been making PPE masks, culturally sensitive PPE masks. Some people have done performances, some people have done yoga classes, some people have made t-shirts, organised events. A lot of people have done little things. These little things, these small acts of kindness has helped us to raise money. Not as much as Major Tom, who's raised over £30 million for the NHS, but we're getting there. And I just want to acknowledge that people have done walking stuff, all kind of stuff people have done to contribute to that, making cakes and all kind of stuff in their little way to support the work as well. But I want to highlight 3 individuals who have really helped in a big way. Next slide. So I want to acknowledge the London Gospel Community Choir, Henry Beaumont, Rias Phillips, and then you're going to hear from Cashain a little bit later. So next slide, please. So Rias Phillips, a young black man who launched a successful book a couple of years ago on Caribbean takeaways and restaurants. When he heard that we were looking for money for the Majonzi Fund, off his own back, he approached a whole variety of chefs, Black Asian chefs, Mediterranean chefs, all around to say, can you contribute with recipes of your diaspora communities so we can make into a diaspora recipe book so we can raise money for the Majonzi Fund? And he launched this ebook, and he's raised just under, I think, roughly about £30,000 for us, where people can download the book and make a contribution. And I just want to say big up Riaz in terms of a young man who has gone over and above to help us in this big way. So I just want to thank him very much. He's been interviewed quite a few times of his work, but I want to thank him personally for that. Next slide, please. I want to acknowledge London Gospel Community Choir. You'll listen to the song a bit later on, but again, they heard the call from Majonzi, and they have dedicated one of their songs where the royalties for the first 18 months will go to the fund, and the song's fantastic, called Sun and the Rain, which is and obviously everyone knows the Gospel Choir has been going for about over 30 years under the leadership of Basil Mead, so we salute you for your support. Next slide, please. And also Henny Beaumont, she works for the Guardian newspaper. She is a freelance graphic artist. She does all the cartoons that you see in the Guardian, and she did a fantastic one acknowledging the Windrush victims, and then she tagged me into that, and I contacted her and said, would you do one connected with those men and women from the Black and Asian community who've died on the front line to help us raise money for Majonzi, and she'd done that. So this is what she's done. We then made it into a complete billboard poster, which we unveiled in September with Deborah Wicks-Bernard, who's a deputy mayor for at GLA, Greater London Assembly, and also Carol Williams, who's a councillor, cabinet member in Hackney. And we launched it in Newington Green by the Social Club, and it's there, Pride and Joy. But also you can buy this poster from the Guardian website for £35, and she's listed everyone from the Black and Asian community who have died of COVID-19, written down, as well as highlighted some of the key people that were quite prominent when they were featured in the media as well. And you'll recognise some of the names and recognise the faces as well. So I want to thank Henny for your support there. Next slide. And I'll stop there because I now want to invite Cashain David to join us, who will talk about his involvement with Majonzi and his experiences of grief. If you can drop the slide show, thank you. So Cashain, welcome to this evening.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation, Patrick.
So please, so just tell us a bit about your perspective of grief and what's your contribution to supporting us.
Sure. I'd like to do that by sharing a slideshow with some pictures, because it's often easier to illustrate what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to share, and hopefully you will be able to recognize the journey that I'm going to take you on. So Cremanta Rum is supporting the Majonzi Fund. And this is a really important thing, that we wanted to do something that was important to our community, important to the rum business that we have established, and very specifically with our first rum, we wanted to do something to give back into our community, where a lot of our stories and the inspiration is coming from. So if I can just, my slideshow isn't moving. Here we go. I want to tell you just a little bit about the Cremanta Distillery and Blending House. Now, it's an independent Black-owned business, creating rums which are inspired by stories and knowledge passed on over generations in African and Caribbean families. Why we were interested in supporting the Majonzi Fund, I mean, Patrick and I go back quite a way, and we had a conversation nearly 10 years ago at the Rum Fest, where I was working as a brand ambassador, about rum and what the social significance of that was. So we wanted to support the Majonzi Fund, recognizing that COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on our Black communities, and it's disrupted a lot of our cultural practices, as we've been hearing. It also has left us with a sense of unfinished business and wondering whether or not we've paid the loss, the recognition it deserves. Our usual practices, such as the 9 nights from Jamaica, my own background, the big drum ceremonies from Carriacou, and you can see that rum has a particular place in recognizing the ancestors there, and more generally in pouring libations that we see throughout the whole diaspora. So rum has often had a very particular place. My personal story that I'll share with you is that I know this pain that we've been hearing earlier in the presentations. We lost our mother recently under the first COVID restrictions, and it left our family struggling with a lack of culturally familiar endings and arrangements. So as a family, I wanted to help my own family, and I wanted to do something with the rum that I've been developing and I've been working on for quite some time. So I produced a limited addition room for the memorial that we had as a family. It was socially distanced, but at least there was some way that I wanted to provide something that was important to me that I could give and also recognize my mum's life. So it's a drink, it's a keepsake, but it's also more than that. It's also something that can help, that helped our family deal with a very difficult time. And I was blown away by the response of my family members by that. A few months later, my uncle Julian died, and I offered the same thing to his family. And again, it was something that they really valued and recognized as something that was a memorial to their father and something that they could keep. So how can you help? We've set up a GoFundMe fundraising page, Cromanti supporting the Majonzi Fund. And if you donate £45 to the GoFundMe page, you'll receive a bottle of Cromanti rum, as well as making a donation to the Majonzi Fund. Cromanti rum will also then match your donation, so that we want to give back as much as we can into a very worthy cause. I'll leave my details there if anybody does want to follow up, but more importantly, go and donate. Majonzi is a great, it's a great cause, it's a great fund, and it really is very much about us and our way of actually recognizing and remembering people.
Thanks for that, Cashain, and thanks for your support. And please support and buy the rum, not just for drinking, but just for fundraising to help that. You can just park it to one side, don't have to drink it, but support. But it's a good rum anyway, because I'll be ordering my lot for my family for Christmas. Over to you, Yansie.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much, Cashain. I'm coming for my rum. I'm not a drinker, but I'm coming for my rum. Thank you so very much. We've got just over half an hour and we've got lots more exciting things to get through. So Dr. Rosemary, please, can you unmute yourself? Tell us who you are. And I have just one question that I want to ask, and it's in response to something Aisha commented about the fact that Black ministers aren't allowed the same opportunities to get the same amount of work within the funeral industry. Is that a fact?
I can't really say for that. I think it depends. At the moment, there are lots of different ministers who take on responsibilities for funerals. And so I've been online and seen and attended funerals with independent ministers, as well as funerals with ministers from more mainstream churches, Black and I'm talking about Black ministers. So I can't really say, because what I can say is that, I mean, on Friday, I'll be going to take the funeral of a wonderful gentleman who has sadly died. And I'll be, he particularly asked for me, so I'll be going to take his funeral after I come off here, which I won't be able to stay for the rest of all of this, because I have to go to a 9 nights by Zoom for a beloved grandmother who passed just before the age of 100. So yeah, so if death is around me at the moment. I think that there has historically been a challenge for Black ministers and sometimes funeral ministry. So, but I think also at the moment, quite honestly, the way funeral directors are taking responsibility for leading on who they get, they may go and get a tried and tested minister, people that they've gone to, that they understand, and that can be a Black person or a white person. I think that there might be, and I only say might be, perhaps more of a challenge for independent ministers if they're not known to that funeral house. Then that could be a difficulty. And sometimes if your family is not from a mainstream tradition, but goes to an independent church, and then they go along to the funeral directors and say, we'd like this minister, maybe there's a little bit of some tension with that, because they might want somebody that they know who will lead the service in a way that goes along with if it's a creme, the half-hour service, you know, if it's in the chapel at the cemetery, you know, you only have these time slots. And never mind the challenges that we have at the moment with numbers that can be present and the social distancing, you know, and all the other challenges. I wanted to say, because I know there's lots of excellent speakers, and I'm speaking from a Christian tradition, and I know that we've got speakers from interfaith traditions who are waiting to speak, and I really want us to give them the place and space because they've been waiting to speak. So the only words that I felt hadn't been mentioned, and I wanted to just bring into this, is that the tradition that I think has really been lacking in this whole process of how we grieve in this very itemized way, you know, separated way, is that we're not able to lament. And I just haven't heard that word. I know it's there in behind what people are saying, but we just haven't been able to keen in the way that people keen. We haven't been able to express openly the way that people bring forth their grief. And that, I think, is one of the words. The other thing, I think, that the challenge of this this loss of sense that we've had, this separation, you know, we've heard the loss of touch, the loss of gathering, the loss of sound, of music, of singing, the loss of smell, of the senses that go around, and particularly, you know, that loss of taste, because for many people, when we grieve as well, we celebrate, and when we celebrate, we eat and we drink, and that sense of that's missing. So all our senses are being deprived at this point in time, and I think what that's bringing for us is it's trauma. So it's not just the loss that's traumatic. The lack of grieving and lamenting is traumatic, and that is something that we're going to be people are going to be carrying with them. And your responsibilities and ministers' responsibilities is how we take time with people, how we set time apart for them, and how we offer them services and places and spaces where they can hold memorials and where they can come again in over a period of time to mourn again, to grieve again, and to be able to fill back up their senses with that lamenting and all the ways in which we come together. And that will bring a sense of healing. And I think at the moment, you know, people who have lost and they haven't been able to come together, they are still broken. There's a lot of brokenness. And I know from my own uncle who died, and my cousin is still very broken by that death of 6 months ago, because only 10 people were allowed at the funeral. So that sense of being able to connect with people, hold on to people, and grieve and lament was not there. So really, those words, I just wanted to add those in, was that sense of the loss of our senses, was the trauma that will continue, the need to really keen and lament and find that place for that, and the responsibility that that ministers, pastors, priests, counselors, psychoanalysts, the responsibility we have as we go forward to recognize that brokenness and the need to enable people to find a sense of healing through this process. I just want to say that and leave space for my other colleagues to speak.
Thank you so very much, Rosemary. Thank you. That was actually, I didn't actually think about the lamenting and the taste. So thank you for actually throwing that into the mix. I'm going to ask Laura, please, could you just, because I know it's a bit connected, as you were talking about, Rosemary, about healing. I know Laura is one of those people who are there to help with that healing process. Laura, can you unmute, please?
Yep, certainly. Okay. So yes, I'm Laura, and I'm an consultant. So within that role, I perform duties of deaf doula. That means that I can provide support for my clients and their families on a social, emotional, and spiritual level upon the approach to their death. I've always been interested in death from a social perspective. I remember when I was about 7, going to a family member's house and seeing this long box. And my dad said, "You didn't meet cousin Headley." And he picked me up, swooped me off my feet and held me over lengthways cousin Headley's body. So I still remember cousin Headley's face to this day. But as I was saying, it's always interested me from a social perspective. And I first embarked on the role of a doula in 2015, when I was able to help care for my aunt through the night in Guy's Hospital as she was dying. And since her passing, and that I've tended to, I found that there's a real need for greater support around how we do death and how we cope with death, our understanding of it and how we communicate, especially with medical staff at that time. I've been fortunate enough to be able to attend hospital appointments and to be there as consultants are explaining to families that there's nothing more that can be done for their loved ones. And at times like this, I've been able to ask those questions that we can't always ask because the rug has just been pulled from underneath us. So it's been about clarifying, you know, what's happening, what the next steps are, what the family needs to do so that everybody is on the same page. So over time, I've realized that there are more personal ways that we can be dealing with dying, death, and bereavement. And although we don't know when we're going to die, it really doesn't hurt to plan. The more we plan, and the more we share our wishes with others and normalize conversations around dying and death and bereavement, the more our loved ones can feel more supported when that time comes and move forward, knowing that they're doing the right thing with regards to the wishes of their family members. I'm also a funeral celebrant. I conduct funerals as well. So following on from what Sister Rosemary was saying with regards to, you know, conducting funerals, especially during COVID-19, I was told recently that whereas there were a good 30 odd funerals a day, I was told that nobody from an African Caribbean perspective with regards to funeral celebrants were actually given a look in. And it's true what Sister Rosemary says, that at that time, funeral directors tend to go with people that they know. However, because we're not given that opportunity to show our ability, we are unknown. So as a funeral celebrant, I liaise with the funeral directors and I create what I call celebrations of life that really honor the client and honor the families. Too many funerals where there's been such a disconnect between the person who is standing there and the person and the family that are the intended, you know, subject audience. What I have found is that by working through the doula role, I've been able to form a close relationship with the family and then conduct a celebration of life that just honors them on a more personal level. And I also provide bereavement support via counselling, via hypnotherapy, and through a listening service as well. So within my role, I'm all for catering for the whole process as opposed to just one particular part and isolating the rest. It's about having a holistic approach as opposed to isolating, because this is what we used to do. Originally, this was a community event, this was a social event, and everybody was involved in the process. It's completely foreign to our DNA. And so we are forcing ourselves into situations now where we can't grieve openly, where we can't sing, where we can't come together, where we can't touch and hold. And these are our healing mechanisms. This is how we do. The West would benefit quite a lot from knowing how we do. And I'm going to wrap up soon, but I find myself in many counselling environments, courses. I found myself in very many courses, attending courses where I am the only African Caribbean person in attendance. I'm used to it, but we are not represented. And so within those courses, when they're talking about people of, when they're talking about culture, they're talking about Asian culture or, European culture, never are they talking about African culture. They may talk about Christians, but we are just lumped in, So when it comes to our traditions and our beliefs and our ways, we are not acknowledged. And this is a really sad situation to be in. We are just not visible, and yet we contribute so much. So as an end-of-life consultant, my intention really is to just raise awareness and educate. There is so much need for education around this situation where funeral directors are upselling to us because they know that we bury, they know that we spend our money. We need to be taking back some of that control as far as I'm concerned and working within ourselves together as one. But I'm going to leave it there, but thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Laura. There's so much there that you have said. And death doula, I mean, who knew? I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't know such a thing exists. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned the fact that, a lot of the times there's a lack of focus and acknowledgement about the way of the ancestors. But we're very lucky in the space today. We've got Omelade, who I'm sure can share some light on that for us. So Umi, do you mind unmuting yourself, please? Tell us a little bit of who you are and give us a different perspective.
Okay, greetings. Interesting, isn't it? We're talking about death and dying. And for me, one of the first things that we would do is to pour libation to acknowledge the ancestors. So I want to do that verbally by acknowledging our ancestors who were buried in the soils of Africa, and those who are scattered throughout the diaspora, and those who perished in the Middle Passage. And I sit here, I'm really quite full. I don't have a title, but I think when Aisha was talking about somebody in the community that you go to, I suspect that is me. I'm a Grenadian, and I'm also a Yoruba priest, in that I can do naming ceremonies and funerals and marriages. And whilst I mostly now do naming ceremonies, I am also the person in the community that very often people call when somebody has died very suddenly. And I am about the practice. I'm about the 3 nights and the 9 nights and the 40 nights. I'm about the food that we would provide at 3 nights and 9 nights and 40 nights. I'm about acknowledging ancestors on a daily basis. I'm really focused on what is important to enable people to come to peace with their grief. And whilst we keep talking about COVID, I would actually say that certainly my experience during this period is how COVID has triggered a lot of loss that people haven't dealt with. Even before COVID, there are those of us who were very reluctant to engage with or were conflicted when it came to religion and culture. So we might be Christians and we know that we have to go to the church and there's the Bible and all of that, but we also know that there is culture around death and dying. And what's important for me in working with individuals and families is finding out what will enable them to be at peace with what has happened. You know, I grew up with an old woman who would be called when people were dying at home. And the process of reconciliation in families, that was seen as very important, because traditionally it's seen as beneficial that we resolve any conflict we have with people before they pass. It's important to the spirit that's passed, and it's important to the family and friends that are around. Is it Cashain who talked about the 9 nights in Jamaica? I think the one with the rum, am I getting that right? When he talked about Jamaica and 9 nights. And it's interesting, I was actually taken to Jamaica to help a family with the burial of a loved one. And I was fascinated to find that in Jamaica, they have 2 different kinds of 9 nights. They have the 9 nights that we traditionally have, which is the 9th night, but they also call 9 nights the night before the funeral. They have quite a shindig. Those are all rituals that we did to enable us to manage our grief. And what I suggest to people in terms, because of where we are, is that we try to do the best that we can with where we are. So the fact that we cannot gather after a funeral during these times to do the big feeding, because that is so important, but we can do a little feeding at home. The first thing that I do when I hear somebody has passed, and I encourage people to do, is light a candle, say their names, and have a glass of water. Cook the food that you know they enjoyed, because that is our connection. And that we continue to call their names, because that's part of our culture and our tradition. It might not be religious, but it's what we're used to doing to enable us to manage. I think I've said enough.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Very insightful. And I did not know in Jamaica there were 2 different types of 9 nights. So I learned something new again. Every speaker has taught me something new. So thank you so very much for that. Now we have Maureen. Maureen, do you mind unmuting, introducing yourself, and tell us your perspective of all of this?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about my experience of grief. We, as a family, lost our 2 parents in the summer of this year. Related, unrelated to COVID, the jury's still out on that. What would I say? I was speaking with my sister when I spoke to her that I was going to be on this panel, and I said, do you know something? If someone was to ask me, what date did Mummy die? I would not be able to tell you without looking at the order of service. And the same would be for Daddy. He died 3 weeks later. And says, I don't know what date they actually died, despite being there. It's blocked out of my memory at this moment in time. And she said, that's a bit strange, isn't it? And I said, well, I'm not sure. Maybe this is part of the grieving process. So the story is, Mum and Dad were both in a residential home. They did not share a room because at that point couples were not sharing rooms. We would see them, my sisters and brothers would see them regularly. We would have regular contact with them. And then they got ill. Dad was rushed to the hospital. Mum followed within a few days. So they were in the same hospital having care. Dad with his diabetes, and Mum, unfortunately, had stopped eating and had stopped speaking. Mum had normal pressure hydrocephalus, so maybe on her brain there was impact. And we know with COVID, it attacks the most vulnerable parts of a person's immune system. So Mum and Dad were in the hospital for about 3 or 4 weeks. Fortunately, during the summer, we were able to get them discharged to our home, and we nursed them in the living room, side by side, with hospital beds. We did our best for them. Mum never spoke again. She didn't speak for 5 weeks up to her death. On the day before her discharge was when they told us that she was the end of life. We weren't expecting that. So COVID and the COVID legislation has actually robbed us more of our funeral rites than our services. It's robbed those people that are dying of that personal care, the contact with the health professionals. It's robbing people as we speak of connection. If you have a loved one, and I know for our community, letting our family members go into a nursing home is something that is quite alien. But for modern parents who are juggling children, grandchildren and careers, we actually no longer have the capacity to be caring for our loved ones at home traditionally. Our parents, particularly my dad, did not want to be in a nursing home. My mum understood the conflicting priorities that we had as their children. But mum went first and dad had to go after. They were married for 59 years. So how are we managing our grief? I'm not sure. I've shed a tear or two. I do a lot of writing. They're fully present in our lives, even in their death. It was very difficult because we weren't able to grieve for mum's death because we still had to look after daddy the next morning. So the grieving is somewhere in the ether, waiting to pop out perhaps, or maybe it will just be buried alongside them and we will continue to suppress this grief. There's 10 siblings and we are all grieving in our own different ways. The majority of us went back to work within a few weeks. One sister particularly is not able to go back to work at the moment. And, you know, I'm a kind of like full-time grandma, so enjoying the fresh life of new babies. What does grief mean to me? I don't know. My father and I spoke a lot about death, so it wasn't something that we would fear. We spoke extensively about life after. As a Christian, he knew that he would be meeting his own father in heaven. And with that said, we spoke and we laughed and we joked, and I questioned him about if he was ready to meet his father. He was reassured that he had been a good father on earth. And just to end, when my mother passed, and you know, I think it's funny, because we didn't have any of our elders around us, even though we were all in our 50s, we couldn't remember the things that they would have been doing. So we were singing really badly the church songs. We were, you know, trying to remember prayers, and you know, we had a bit of Jim Reeves on in the background, all the things that mummy and daddy would have enjoyed. So we did it our way. You know, I anointed them with essential oils. I was rubbing mummy's arm up and down with oils, and we all laid hands on them. We slept on the floor in the living room with mum and dad for several nights whilst they were in the process of this slow death. Dad was alongside mummy when she died, but we were all in the living room listening to every breath, every laboured breath, and waiting and reassuring her that we were all here and we were all letting her go. So that's my story. Thank you for listening.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing it, Maureen. Sending you a hug through the screen, but thank you so much for sharing it. So much love, and the love you have for your parents, it's really come through. You know, I like when you said you're doing it their way, all the music, the Jim Reeves, I could just imagine that. So thank you so much again for that powerful, powerful testimony. We have Imam Irfan. So he's going to give us a different perspective now, and it's something that I know nothing about. I'll be quite honest with you. Imam, could you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Where do I start? First and foremost, thank you, not only to the organizers, but to all those who participated and shared their very, very emotional and human stories. I was asked, I think, and please forgive me if this is wrong, is as you say there, Yansie, you wanted a different perspective, and actually, as we hear more and more stories of grief and loss, you probably won't be surprised if I say actually it's not that different. One of the things that I, as an imam who's been very keen, I hate this phrase interfaith dialogue. I'm more about kind of doing things together, interfaith action, and what comes out of all of my experiences, and certainly in this pandemic, is that humanness. I could share my own personal testimony of losing my father 2 years ago, and this recent pandemic here. As an imam, I'm going to start off with something that Rosemary said, if I may. And we learned, I think 3 or 4 weeks later, into the kind of the May-June time, that one of the other symptoms of COVID was this loss of sense of smell. And I want to say thank you, Rosemary. You did a fantastic point there, made a fantastic point about actually how we've lost the senses during this moment of grief. As somebody from an Asian background, the most painful thing I think during supporting this whole kind of loss era has been all of those losses, the sense of physical hugs and wiping tears and grabbing onto somebody, letting your heart just flow, and again, that word lament. In our tradition, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he instructed us actually not to lament in the sense of wailing and beating and kind of, going overly kind of emotional about it. When he lost his own blessed son, Ibrahim, the companions noticed that he was crying. And they were shocked. They looked at him and said, well, hang on a minute. I thought you advised us and told us that it was not Islamic. It wasn't the right thing to do, to lament and to cry over somebody in grief. And he said, no, this, what comes down naturally that you cannot control, you're not accountable for. But this, your tongue, and he touched his tongue. He says, this that comes, that is in between your jaws, that you're accountable for. So, he showed people, our prophet, he showed people how to grieve. One of the very kind of, I think, blessings that I have as a believer is that we're able to make sense of these very difficult moments. I've been listening attentively to all of the testimonies of the people presenting here this evening. And really, I find myself in awe of all of your work, in particular the new fund that has been set up, and I wish you all the best with that, the Majonzi Fund. But the second thing I wanted to touch upon was these nights, and again, maybe you will be surprised or not, but this is something that we've lost hugely in the Muslim community. In our tradition, the moment of actual departure, from that moment, 3 days later, so this 3 nights that you mentioned, that is very much also part and parcel of the Islamic culture. And exactly the same thing. It is all about eating together. Somebody said it so beautifully before, sharing that food that you cook together. And again, this is why I say the perspective is not that different, because somebody mentioned earlier also that actually you cook the food of those you cook the favorite food of that person who you've just lost. So within our traditions, I think collectively we have this this commonality of grieving. Lots have been said about, from a kind of emotional and a psychological perspective about it. But I think from an Islamic perspective, all of what's been said in synopsis is a beautiful, beautiful verse of the Holy Quran, which I know when I lost my beloved father, quite suddenly, it was a phrase that comes under the lips of everybody. So as soon as you hear of a death, you know, your phone goes crazy with people sending you messages and telling, you know, saying this phrase. And the phrase is what? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So amidst all of the emotion, amidst the sometimes the anger and the anguish, amidst the loss and the pain, comes this powerful and solid, almost kind of philosophical statement from God Almighty, where he says, look, Lillah, we came from him. This life that you have was his and is his, and he's simply, you know, it's simply been returned. Ilayhi raji'un, we've simply gone back to him. And that is a sentence which, when I'm doing my services, again, socially distant services of the janazah, of the funeral prayer, has been immensely difficult over these past weeks, and other people have reflected upon that. And I can honestly say that despite the really difficult times, despite that pain, despite that loss, you know, I always personally, anyway, always tried to look at the blessings that God has given us through this time. And this screen that I've got here in front of me, I've done lots of the equivalent of the 9 days, the 9 nights that you mentioned, Cashain, I think, mentioned as well. We have the 3rd and also then the 40th day. The 40th is another important point of that grieving process, where, you know, it's kind of a few days have passed, a month or so has passed, and the grieving process specifically for the household, the Prophet has said that actually you shouldn't prolong that, because again goes back to that point about this was all his doing, and you should be content in his doing. Finding your contentment in his will, as difficult as it is something that we're encouraged to do as Muslims. So the 40th is almost a watershed moment where you've you know, you've lamented, you've grieved, you've cried, you've prayed, you've done all of those things collectively, and now it's kind of, you know, almost go back to your normal life. But of course, as others have said, that loss never ever actually disappears. I saw a clip the other day, actually, somebody explaining this grief, that it doesn't get smaller, it doesn't reduce. You know, this thing about time is a great healing. It's, of course it is, but it doesn't mean to say that the grief is any less. The grief and the amount of grief and the suffering, the pain is always there. It's, in fact, it's, you know, it perhaps grows. And what we learn to do as human beings is the rest of our life continues and kind of grows around it. So really, that's all I wanted to share, is that we have far more commonalities than perhaps certainly I realized before this evening. And I want to say once again, thank you to Patrick for organizing that great Majonzi Fund, and hope and pray, and my prayers are with all of you, especially those who've lost personally people through this difficult time. I've been lucky in the sense that I've not lost anyone personally through COVID. I've had to support many people through the loss of COVID as an imam here locally in my town of Rochdale and Greater Manchester. And I feel almost kind of privileged, but the pain that was there of being cheated, I think I'm going to have to say that word if we're going to be very frank with each other, the pain of being cheated, for not being able to do what is required of us as fellow believers, as fellow people of faith, for the community. That sense of loss, I don't think I'll ever overcome. So I want you to pray for me and to pray for all of the communities that have lost their loved ones during this difficult time. God bless you all.
Thank you so very much, Imam. that was very moving. It's fascinating to see the commonalities. And had you not come here today, I would not have even realized there were so many commonalities. Something you said actually made me remember when I was going through my own grief when I lost my dad. A friend said to me, like, grief was like a cut, that sometimes scar tissue forms over it and it's okay, but there are times when it gets picked and it really hurts. And something you said just made that come right back to me. So thank you again so very much. There's so much we have in common across cultures we don't even understand. Thank you. Empress Lee. So Empress Lee has been a great supporter of all the work we've been doing. On a Friday, she's always there supporting us with our You Give Hope. So we set up You Give Hope as a form of Friday evening entertainment for people who have been troubled during the first stage of the pandemic. I know time is going, but I'll just give you a quick history of it. There was one particular day when 3 people had contacted me who they were all suicidal. In that one particular day, there were 3 men. And I couldn't think of how could I support these 3 men? And if it's 3 of them in one day, what's happening to others in the community? So I phoned another friend and I was explaining to him what was happening. And he was saying, we need to do something to help lift the spirits of people in the community. And we decided we would have a Friday evening gig. We got some musicians to come and some DJs to come. And that was in May. And from then to now, every Friday evening, we've been putting on this gig, just artists come and perform. Empress Lee is one of those who has been coming. She will tell her own reason why she's been into the space. Empress Lee?
Hi, yes, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, thanks, guys, for inviting me to come and speak. How can I describe how I'm feeling right now? I am bursting at the seams. I am so full. I feel like I've eaten dinner for like 10 people. There's so much to absorb. Right, yeah, my mother, she passed away on the 27th of April. And just like Maureen said, I actually had to look in the calendar to see the date that my mum passed away because I couldn't remember. But at the time when she passed, we hadn't been able to see her for some time due to the word that I refused to call because it's getting too much airplay as far as I'm concerned. And it's responsible for the way I'm feeling. So, yeah, we weren't able to see her for a while. How I feel then, the feelings that I've got, I felt glad in a sense because before she actually passed away in a nursing home. I was looking after her for just about 2.5 years prior to her going into the nursing home. So I'm kind of glad that I was able to do that and to help her because as somebody else, I can't remember who it was, said that you know, in our culture, being in a home is not the done thing at all. And my mum was quite adamant, even though when I was looking after her, you know, don't put me in a home, but she needed so much complex medical assistance that I was unable to give her. And obviously, I'm not a medical person. So unfortunately, I had to put her in the home. And yeah, I was happy I was able to do that for her. Luckily she had a stroke, and which caused her death. She died about a week or so after she had a second stroke. I feel angry. I feel sorry. I feel robbed. These are all the words that comes to mind when I think back to my mum's feeling robbed, because I mean, we have quite elaborate send off for our loved ones, and that was totally non-existent. Somebody in the chat, I saw somebody put in the chat that, and I thought I was going crazy when I had this thought. I was saying, is my mum actually in that casket? Yeah, we went to see her in the funeral home, and yeah, you could see her because, you know, they were expecting us to come, but we weren't able to, you know, have a last view of her before she was laid to rest, and is she really in there? And I just thought I was crazy for thinking that, but obviously other people have the same kind of thoughts. And because we're not able to do our traditional viewing, etc. A funeral is supposed to be a celebration of life. I wasn't able to celebrate my mother. And it's almost as if she didn't even live, for me personally. I don't know, I don't really talk about this. I mean, this is like the first time I've actually spoken about my mum's death, and I see it as a kind of weakness. Not speaking about it kind of made me feel like I was strong, because I didn't have to kind of deal with it or, you know, have to face the reality. But yeah, it's really difficult. I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to end. But I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that can kind of relate to the feelings that I'm feeling. And I know I'm not crazy. I know I'm not the only one. But yeah, I mean, thanks to the Ubele, you know, that I can come on a Friday, listen to some music, dance, enjoy, and things like that. And I think it's quite important not to kind of lock yourself away, because, you know, you do find strength in being amongst other people, you know. So, I mean, I have buried myself. I'm a producer and a manager for a musician, and I have so buried myself. I'm on Zoom 24/7, and I've totally buried myself into my music so that I can just not have to think about the fact that mum's gone. Because when I compare it to my father passed 13 years ago on the 22nd of December, so it's going to be his anniversary in a couple of weeks. And it was just so, I didn't feel like this at all for my dad. I wouldn't say happy is the right word, but I was in a better space. We celebrated his life, and it's like his life did matter, you know, because we're able to celebrate in that way. And it was just such, it's like from one extreme to the other when it came to the non-celebration of mum's life. But yes, and I'm so glad you guys invited me on here so that I can, for the very first time, actually speak about the death of my mother. But yeah, thank you so much, guys. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And thank you for choosing this platform to talk about it. And you know, there are people here who you can speak to at any time. And we look forward to seeing you, as always, every Friday. You're always there. Thank you so very much. I know that we are out of time, but please, we just have a couple more artists to go through. And then Patrick will do the memorial wall, and I will wrap up. So Stuart is someone who, for the first time this Friday gone, was part of our You Give Hope Friday evening entertainment. And he read a very powerful poem, which I am sure he's going to share with us now. Stuart, could you unmute, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your really heartening, very human and very emotional sharings. I'm feeling very, very connected. So I'm going to start by reading a poem, which is called A Farewell Letter to Mum. My mum died unexpectedly on the 25th of June this summer. And we were still having to deal with the restrictions of lockdown by the time of her funeral in July. So I'm going to read the poem first, and then I'm going to share a few reflections about some of the challenges and some of the dynamics that have arisen since her passing. Farewell letter for Mum. A tiger mother through and through was our dear mum, our family's heart. Fiercely protective of your cubs towards any threat, a constant border. I cherish that we grew up knowing we were safe from those of ill will. We were truly blessed to know robust loyalty lived by you and Dad. Friends and neighbours too were the beneficiaries of this precious gift. 57 years, a record to be proud of. We celebrate you. Alert and steadfast, you showed us a quiet grace. Thanks for this vision. I am grateful, proud, as your son inheriting such a vest for life. Infinite is my hungry curiosity, thanks to your deep love. Laura, Heather, me, we have each blossomed in life, thanks to you and Dad. Your sacrifices were many, your love constant, generous always. Your heart's compassion never left you, always there, a warm oasis. Your welcoming ways said yes to so many people over the years. As a teen, my friends marveled at your dynamic openness to them. Your laughter raucous, your anger a summer storm, quick, intense, then gone. Your sense of justice, unerring, true and constant, in our DNA too. Creativity, yours really knew no bounds. We share that too. Your canvas was our home, and each one of us kids, and of course our dad. Our garden a jewel, lovingly crafted and kept, your and Dad's domain. My love of nature, yes, it endures and deepens, thanks to you and Dad. Innumerable moorland and seaside journeys throughout our childhood. The root of this prize, weekends out through all seasons, traipsing here and there. I remember well your endless knitting projects, complex creations. I tried to convince you that money was in it. You said, love only. Countless are the times you bailed me out of trouble. I'm ever grateful. Yes, yes, it's true too, that you were my champion, never flagging. Many worlds I've known, my passport stamped with your love, the constant visa. I miss you right now, your energetic bustle, your yes you can ways. It was a delight to learn you swam like a fish, a joy we both share. I'm gladdened though that you have found your own peace and that it was swift. Your life was so full, your warmth touched many folk. We are so grateful. You are the real deal, litmus of honesty, sought out by many. Rest now, dear mother. You inspired such deep courage through your loving ways. Be assured, your gifts shine bright in Amelia, Freya, Jamal, and Merlin. All my love, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Stuart. What a lovely, lovely, moving poem. I feel as almost that I know your mom through it. You know, you've actually shared her with us. So thank you so very much for that. And I'm going to see you on Friday, I hope.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
So I wanted to share 3 brief reflections in relation to my mum having passed this summer. The first of them is that it was a total surprise. The last time I saw her was on the 15th of December in 2019 when I visited her and my dad in Devon. And we all already knew that she was unwell. For the last 10 years of her life, she'd lived with a condition called let me get this right. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, which is a disease common to people who have smoked for maybe 55 of her 79 years. She was a very enthusiastic smoker, very committed to the cause. And this is what brought on the COPD. So the last 10 years of her life, our dad was her carer. She wasn't infirm, but she was reduced in the kind of activities that she could undertake. But right to the last, literally to the last weeks of her life, she was in her garden avidly doing what loving gardeners do. So when I learned from one of my sisters that mum had died on the 25th of June, it was a shock. But one of the things that happened as a consequence of mum dying is that whereas my two sisters and I had been estranged for 4 years and 2 years respectively, we came together in an instant to go and support our dad, who's 84 and survives mum, to take care of all the necessary business that's required when somebody dies. And everybody here will appreciate what that business entails. The second thing I wanted to share is that something happened between my dad and I during the time I was in Devon for the funeral, which happened in July. It was something that I thought was an insignificant exchange between us. But the upshot of that exchange is that since the 16th of July, which was the day after my own 57th birthday, my dad and I haven't spoken. He has said he no longer recognizes me as his son. I don't know if that will always be the case, but for now, that is the case. The third thing I wanted to share, when we talked earlier, or when earlier speakers talked about ceremony and rituals and healing, is that I committed to journaling, to writing day pages for 30 consecutive days after I got back from Devon from my mother's funeral in July. And it was a beautiful process. It was a challenging process. It was a delightful process. And through it, I was able to reflect on all of the feelings that were present in regards to my mum, who I loved dearly. But as any of you who've been around a wild tiger knows, they're pretty big, scary beasts. So it wasn't all rainbows, but it was a really wonderful process. And I really couldn't recommend strongly enough to anybody else going through this process to just try it. It's a real balm. It doesn't take anything away, but it really helps give you perspective and a sense of space. The final thing I want to share as a reflection is that on Christmas Day, it will mark 6 months since Mum's death. And this year, of course, will be a remarkable year because for the first time in my own 57 years, Mum won't be around. But as I wrote in the piece, in the poem, somehow I'm heartened that none of us knew that the day she died was going to be the day she died. So yeah, there are some reflections. So thank you.
Thank you again, Stuart. Thank you so very much. Now, Alexander the Great. Alexander is also another one of our You Give Hope supporters on a Friday evening. And Alexander did a special tribute for us. He played it Thursday when we had the launch. It was just, I would just shut up and let you listen and be the judge of how touching it is.
Thank you. I know we've got very little time. Just want to say the song is going to be 1 week old on Tuesday. It was written especially for Thursday's event. And after the wonderful example and the information we had from Patrick, I think we should make this song, I'm going to record, I'm in the process of recording it, make it available as a download to add to the Majonzi Fund. So we'll do that in the course of the next week, definitely. I shall be talking, well, to whoever. Let's just go for it. It's called Sometimes. It's so hard to grieve in isolation when the climb before us looks immense. Whether partner, close friend, or relation, loneliness can feel much more intense as more of us struggle with bereavements. We can't let this virus get control. Oh no, take time off to cherish our achievements, letting precious memories fill your soul. Sometimes we hurt so much, sometimes we feel their touch, sometimes we are hostile, sometimes we want to smile, sometimes we have to scream, sometimes we're in a dream, sometimes we rise above, sometimes we just feel love, sometimes. Special days are when these things most matter. Diwali, Christmas, Pesach, Ramadan. Help is there for us before we shatter. Whether we are child, woman, or man. Suffering in silence can't resolve it. Locking up the pain we're going through. Oh no, peer groups are there who may help us solve it. Reaching out is what we need to do. Sometimes we hurt so much, sometimes we feel their touch, sometimes we are hostile, sometimes we want to smile, sometimes we have to scream, sometimes we're in a dream, sometimes we rise above, sometimes we just feel love, sometimes. Sometimes we may think our heart is healing, other times we're sure it's going to crack. No one else can know just how we're feeling. Are we moving on or sliding back? Grief is like a basket full of sadness, filled with stories of a loving past. Oh yes, telling them again can bring us gladness and ensure our memories will last. Sometimes we hurt so much, sometimes we feel their touch, sometimes we are hostile, sometimes we want to smile, sometimes we have to scream, sometimes we're in a dream, sometimes we rise above, sometimes we just feel love, sometimes.
Thank you, Alexander. As always, wonderful performer. Thank you so very much.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Jagby had to leave early, but she's left a few words with Patrick Vernon. He will just give us her message, and then he will introduce the memory wall.
Yeah. So Dr. Jagby Johal couldn't make it. She had to go to another call. But I've got something to read from her, so if you can just bear with me. And she talked about grief in terms of the Sikh community here in the UK. Although grief and bereavement experiences involve some universal factors, it's also a highly personal process, often shaped by religious and cultural practices. Understanding of different religious and cultural beliefs of individuals who belong to minority religions such as Sikhism may shed some light on the role of religion, culture, family, how food plays as a coping mechanism through the bereavement experience, all of which have been affected and curtailed by the pandemic. You cannot mourn with the family members, ceremonies are limited, and also has effect and impact on the grieving process. Many ill Sikhs, when dying, listen to religious music called Kirtan and recite the path or prayer during their final moments, or their family members would do so on their behalf, and also choose to spend their final times with their loved ones. For many in the Sikh community who've died in hospitals of COVID during the first lockdown, this was not facilitated, and they did not have the loved ones by their side. Even in the last lockdown, families were only invited at the very end. Preparing of the body for cremation and viewing of the body has been affected, which makes saying goodbye difficult. After the cremation, the ashes are collected and released in a moving body of water, symbolizing the body's return to earth and the soul's return to God. Many would go back to India or even do it here in the UK, but the current climate has been difficult for families. That was from Dr. Jabir Johal, articulating very similar again to the similarities between the Muslim community and the faith and practices within the African Caribbean community, very similar and in many ways the commonalities that we all share around grieving. That kind of brings me on to the final bit I want to talk about, the Majonzi Fund. Tracy, if you can just bring up the final slides, please. So on the Majonzi website, we have launched a memorial wall, and I know that there are other memorial walls like St. Paul's Cathedral has a signing in book, and other organisations have done that, but we've done one also. And we want to use this wall for a number of purposes. Firstly, for anyone who's lost a family member connected with COVID-19 from different diverse range of Black and Asian communities, they could express their message on there for themselves, their family, or for the wider community. And also, when we start the grant process next year, we want to encourage people have organised events, activities, or whatever ceremonies to use this wall to share that. Because one of the key things is that, unfortunately, one of the consequences of the pandemic, and I have to use the R word, I'm sorry, on a Sunday evening, racism and discrimination, is actually we're not allowed to grieve in the way that we're allowed to grieve. And also we're not given the platforms for that grief. So this is a platform for all of us in the communities to use this as a space to share our grief, but also to share the joys and to commemorate those who have passed on. I think it's really important. It's all part of all our traditions, all parts of our faiths to do that. And also we are keen for anyone who've got poems, blogs, or anything at all that they want to share about their loved ones. We want to use this website to share that information also as well. So that's the link to the website as well. If we could go on to the next slide, please, Tracy. Also, I want to thank people who have helped support the development of the Majonzi Fund. Firstly, the Ubele family, and it is a big family and a growing family. And also I want to thank Tracy, who's done all the kind of technical things behind the scenes around the Zoom call this evening, as well as on Thursday as well. But I particularly want to acknowledge Yvonne Field, the director and the founder of Ubele. The Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, which I'm a fellow of, they gave me funding for the development of the Majonzi website. So I want to thank the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust for their support. I want to thank Sashi Londes, who has designed the website, and also she will be updating all information as regarding all the work. So thank you, Sashi. I also want to thank Pen Mandoka. If you go to the website, there are a number of graphic illustrations and images reflecting the diversity of grief across all different faith communities. So I want to thank Pen, who's done that, and also her colleague, I don't know if I could get a name right, who's Sikona Kimashon, who's done that image that you just saw of the memorial wall. We're trying to reflect the diversity of grief and how it has impacted different communities as well. And also I want to thank everyone who has financially made a donation, no matter how big or small, to the Majonzi Fund, and everyone and all the fundraisers who have contributed, such as London Gospel Community Choir, Hanny Belmont from The Guardian, and the Guardian team, Rios Phillips, and also the Cashain with the rum, please buy. And thank you very much, Alexander the Great. I've known you for many years. You are the official Clipsonian for Britain. If you've not been told that already, I will tell you that. And thanks for your offer again for helping us as well. And if anyone's got any fundraising ideas, please contact me or the Ubele team. We're happy to listen and help in any way. So that leads me just to pass the baton back on to Yansie, who's been a fantastic host as always. Yansie.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you so very much. Yes, please do send us any fundraising ideas you may have, because as you know, the idea is that the money supports those in the community. If you want, you can email us at info@baimstream.org.uk. I've put it in the chat. Someone said in the chat that what a blessing the event is. Someone else said this has been incredible. It really has. I'll tell you what, 2 minutes before I logged on, I got a call to say my 30-year-old nephew had a heart attack. So I sank and I thought, how am I going to do this? Can I get through this? I did. How did I do it? By listening to the stories of everyone else and realizing I'm not alone in what I'm going through. There's so many people out there that are going through exactly what I'm going through. And that was comforting. Thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon, evening with us. We need more of this. So any ideas on how we can do more of this? if you're willing to facilitate this happening somewhere else, please let us know at BAME. Thank you so very much. Have a good evening. Keep safe and keep healthy, and support us in any which way you can.
And thank you again, Yansie, for being a host. I didn't realise that the news that you just shared. You were fantastic as always.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you again, Tracy, who's been... Tracy, can you reveal yourself, please?
1 second.
You don't have to. I mean, if you've got your colours on, I understand, you know.
No. Hey.
Hey. Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome.
Are we playing the London Gospel Community Choir?
No, that's going to be it now, yeah.
Yeah, we've gone 37 minutes over time, so thank you each.
Oh, okay, fine. It's on the Majonzi website, so you can listen to it at your own time. You can raise some money. You can pay through the iTunes and all that stuff. And all the royalties will come to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.